All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Natalie, housewife. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was a Tuesday. Daniel had left for work an hour ago, and the silence of our 4,000-square-foot Colorado home had begun to press in on me, as it did most mornings. I was wiping down the Italian marble counters in the kitchen, a mindless ritual, when the scent hit me. It was clinging to the air in the hallway, a trail he'd left behind. It was sharp, woody, with a note of something unfamiliar, cardamom maybe? It wasn't the subtle, citrusy acqua di Gio he'd worn for the entire 9 years of our marriage. This was new. A change. My husband, a man of rigid habit, whose life was a series of meticulously managed appointments and bottom lines, had changed his cologne. A cold, thin trickle of unease seeped into my veins. It was the same feeling I'd had for weeks, a low-grade hum of wrongness beneath the pristine surface of our life. The late work nights that had become more frequent. The way his phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now permanently glued to his person, screen face down. The new passcode on his iPad. The way he'd flinched just slightly when I touched his shoulder last week. I tried to bury the feeling, as I always did. I moved to the living room, a vast, sterile space decorated in shades of beige and gray by a pricey interior designer Daniel had hired. It was a showroom, not a home. A testament to his success, not our life. My life was contained within these walls, a curated existence of grocery lists, dry cleaning schedules, and waiting for my husband to come home. My own iPad was on the sofa, charging. I picked it up, intending to check the recipe for the coq au vin I was planning to make for dinner, a dish Daniel had once loved. As the screen lit up, my blood turned to ice. A series of iMessages populated the screen, but they weren't mine. Daniel, I can't stop thinking about last night. You ruin me. Daniel, every time I have to leave your bed feels like a punishment. Daniel, this new cologne you like, I can still smell you on me. It's driving me insane. The words in that familiar sans serif font burned into my retinas. They were synced from his Apple Watch. A technological fluke, a betrayal of convenience. For a moment, the world simply stopped. The air vanished from my lungs. The only sound was the frantic, deafening drum of my own heart. My eyes scanned up, desperately seeking a name. The contact was saved as EC. My mind, numb and racing, scrambled for meaning. Eleanor, Evelyn, it didn't matter. The content of the messages was a nuclear bomb detonating in the center of my carefully constructed world. Last night. He had been at a client dinner. He'd come home after midnight, smelling of steak and red wine and that new fucking cologne. He'd kissed my forehead, his lips cool and distant, and told me not to wait up. Your bed. Ruin me. I stared at the words until they blurred into black smudges. This wasn't a one-night stand. This was a narrative. A secret life running parallel to my own, filled with passion and intimacy he had long since withheld from me. This was a long-term affair. The old flame he'd occasionally, casually mentioned from his college days, Elizabeth, Emily, it had to be. A sound escaped my throat, a strangled, animalistic gasp. The iPad slipped from my numb fingers and thudded onto the thick wool rug. I stumbled back, clutching the edge of the cold marble fireplace for support. The room, this beautiful, soulless cage, began to tilt and spin. The abstract art on the walls seemed to mock me with its meaningless splashes of color. The floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered a breathtaking view of the Rocky Mountains, now felt like the glass walls of a prison. I saw the last 9 years of my life flash before my eyes, not as a movie, but as a forensic report. The gradual erosion of our connection, which I'd blamed on the stress of his career. The quiet dinners where the only sound was the clinking of cutlery. The way my role had slowly diminished from wife to chief domestic officer. The hollowed-out feeling of being an accessory to his life, not a partner in it. I had built my entire identity around being Daniel's wife. I had given up my own ambitions, my friends, my sense of self, to curate this perfect life for him. And for what? So he could write messages to another woman about how she ruined him? The irony was a physical blow. He was the one who had ruined me. He had taken my love, my trust, my youth, and used them as foundation stones for a lie. A violent tremor started in my hands and spread through my entire body. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was a fundamental shattering. The Natalie who had woken up this morning, the dutiful, slightly anxious housewife, was gone. In her place was a raw, screaming void of pain and rage. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside. Instead, a terrifying, cold clarity descended upon me. I walked, my steps unnaturally steady, to the master bedroom. I stood in the doorway, looking at the king-sized bed we shared. The bed where he had lain beside me, his body still humming from the touch of another woman. The new cologne on his skin was a brand, a mark of his infidelity that he had worn right into our marital bed. My eyes fell on the framed photograph on his nightstand. It was from our wedding day. We were laughing, young, and stupidly in love, believing the future was a shared country we would explore together. I walked over, picked it up, and studied our faces. The innocence in my eyes felt like a personal insult. Without a second thought, I hurled the frame against the wall. The glass exploded into 1,000 glittering shards, a satisfying, cacophonous crash that ripped through the silence of the house. The photo fluttered to the ground, our smiling faces now lying amidst the wreckage. That was the first crack. Then, I turned to his walk-in closet. I yanked open the doors. Rows of bespoke suits, neatly pressed shirts, shelves of polished shoes. The uniform of the successful corporate businessman, the armor of the liar. I started pulling them down, handfuls of silk and cashmere and fine Italian wool. I threw them into a heap in the center of the room. I wasn't burning them. That would come later. This was more primal. This was an unraveling. I worked with a frenzied, single-minded purpose. I stripped the bed of its 1,000 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. I cleared his toiletries from the bathroom, the expensive face creams, the new, traitorous cologne. I took everything that was his, everything that represented the life he had so carelessly obliterated, and I piled it all in the vast, empty space of the living room. It became a mountain of his betrayal, a monument to my naivete. By the time I was done, my hands were raw, my manicure chipped, my body slick with sweat. I stood there, chest heaving, staring at the pile. The pristine beige of the sofa was a stark backdrop to the chaos I had created. The silence of the house was different now. It was no longer passive, it was waiting. It was charged with the energy of what had just happened and the terrifying question of what would come next. The iPad still lay on the rug, the screen now dark, but the words were seared into my mind forever. I can't stop thinking about last night. You ruined me. A strange, grim smile touched my lips. He thought she ruined him. He had no idea what ruin was. He had no idea what I was capable of. The quiet, accommodating housewife was gone. In her place stood a woman with nothing left to lose, standing in the ruins of her own life, ready to build something new from the ashes. And the first thing she was going to build was a fortress of her own making. The question hung in the air, thick and potent as the scent of his new cologne. What will Natalie do next? The pile stood in the center of the living room for 3 days, a grotesque sculpture of my shattered marriage. I didn't touch it. I walked around it as if it were a sacred, cursed artifact. I didn't answer Daniel's calls. His texts went from confused, "Hey, are you mad about something?" to concerned, "Natalie, you're scaring me, please answer," to frantic, "I'm coming home early, we need to talk." On the evening of the 3rd day, I heard his key in the lock. I was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, still wearing the same yoga pants and t-shirt from the morning of the discovery. I hadn't slept. I had barely eaten. I was running on a fuel of pure, unadulterated rage and a terrifying kind of clarity. The door opened and he stepped in, looking every bit the powerful businessman returning from a conquering day. "Natalie, what the hell is going on? Why aren't you?" His sentence died in his throat as his eyes adjusted to the dim light and landed on the mountain of his possessions in the middle of our pristine living room. His face cycled through emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dawning, sickening comprehension. His eyes flicked from the pile to me. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's the evidence," I said, my own voice flat, stripped of all emotion. It didn't even sound like me. "It's the physical manifestation of your long-term affair with EC, your old flame. Elizabeth, Emily." "Who is she, Daniel?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. The confirmation was in that flinch. He hadn't even had the chance to craft a lie. I had presented him with the verdict before he even knew he was on trial. "Natalie, it's not what you think," he began, the classic, pathetic refrain of every caught cheater. "Don't," I cut him off, standing up. A strange calm settled over me. "Don't insult us both. Your Apple Watch synced your messages to my iPad. I read them. You ruin me. Your bed. I can't stop thinking about last night. So you can skip the denial. You can skip the excuses. All that's left is for you to take your things and get out." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was seeing a stranger. The Natalie he knew was pliable, accommodating, eager to please. This woman, this hollowed-out avenger, was someone he had created but never expected to meet. "Get out," he repeated, a laugh of disbelief escaping him. "This is my house." "It's our house," I corrected him, my voice like steel. "And right now, the part of it that belongs to me is telling the part of it that belongs to you to leave. You can go to a hotel. You can go to her place. I don't care. But you are not spending another night under this roof." "You can't be serious," he scoffed, taking a step forward, trying to reassert his dominance. It was a move that had always worked before. He was the provider, the decision-maker. I was the homemaker. I have never been more serious in my life. I didn't back down. I held his gaze, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He was afraid of me. The realization was intoxicating. "If you don't leave willingly, my next call will be to my lawyer, and then to the local news, detailing the infidelity of a prominent corporate executive. How do you think the board would like that? How would your precious EC feel about being named in a very public, very messy scandal?" It was a bluff. I didn't have a lawyer. I had nothing. But he didn't know that. He only saw the resolve in my eyes and believed it. The fight drained out of him. The corporate titan deflated, leaving behind just a man who had been caught. It was a mistake," he whispered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It didn't mean anything. It meant everything." The scream ripped from my throat, so raw and powerful it startled us both. The calm shattered. It meant our entire life was a lie. It meant every "I love you." Every kiss, every quiet moment was a performance for you. You didn't just cheat on me, Daniel. You made me a fool in my own home. You made my life a supporting role in your secret drama. Now get out." He looked at the pile of his things, then back at me. He saw no crack in my armor. With a defeated sigh, he walked to the pile, grabbed a single suitcase, and began haphazardly stuffing clothes into it. He didn't look at me again. He just worked in silence, the only sound the rustle of fabric and the heavy, labored rhythm of his breathing. When the suitcase was full, he zipped it shut and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob. "Natalie, don't," I said again, my voice now trembling with the effort of holding myself together. "Just go." He went. The door clicked shut behind him, a sound more final than any slamming door could ever be. The moment the lock engaged, my legs gave way and I crumpled onto the staircase, the sobs I had been holding back for days finally racking my body. I cried for the loss, for the betrayal, for the 9 years I would never get back. I cried until I was empty. But when the tears stopped, the clarity returned. He was gone. The house was mine, and the pile of his things was still there, a dark stain on the beige carpet. I couldn't live with it. I couldn't look at it for one more second. The initial plan of methodically redecorating vanished, replaced by a more urgent, visceral need. I needed to erase him. I needed to tear this house apart and put it back together in my own image. I started that night. I went to the garage and found a crowbar. I marched back into the living room, my tears dry, my hands steady. I ignored the pile of his clothes and went straight for the built-in bookshelves he had been so proud of. I wedged the crowbar into the seam and pulled. With a sickening crack of splintering wood, the first shelf came away from the wall. I threw it to the floor, then the next, and the next. I wasn't careful, I wasn't tidy, I was destruction, I was rebirth. For the next week, I was a woman possessed. I didn't leave the house. I ordered groceries online and left them in boxes by the door. I slept on a mattress in the spare room, surrounded by paint samples and fabric swatches. I hired a crew to haul away the demolished shelves and the mountain of Daniel's belongings. I donated every last stitch, every pair of shoes. I kept nothing. I painted the beige living room a deep, bold navy blue. It felt like painting over a wound. I ripped up the neutral carpet to reveal the beautiful hardwood floors underneath, which I had stained a dark walnut. I replaced the cold, modern light fixtures with warm, industrial-style pendants. I was not redecorating, I was performing an exorcism. Every swing of the hammer, every stroke of the paint roller, was a blow against the ghost of my old life. I was no longer Daniel's wife. I was Natalie, the demolition crew, the painter, the designer. My hands were calloused, my nails broken, my hair perpetually dusted with plaster. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. The pain was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was being slowly eclipsed by the ferocious joy of creation. I was building a new world from the rubble of the old, and the first rule of this new world was that it belonged only to me. The silence after the renovation was complete was different. It wasn't the oppressive, waiting silence of before. It was a clean, empty silence, full of potential. The navy walls didn't judge me. The dark walnut floors didn't echo with his footsteps. This house was finally mine, but the emptiness was a double-edged sword. In the quiet spaces between the hammering and the painting, the grief would find its way in, cold and sharp, a serpent slithering through the cracks in my resolve. It was during one of these moments, standing in the middle of my beautiful, self-made living room, that the wave hit. It wasn't anger this time. It was a profound, bone-deep loneliness, the kind that made the air feel thin and the walls feel too far away. I had spent weeks tearing down the physical remnants of Daniel, but I hadn't figured out what to do with the Natalie-shaped void he had left behind. Who was I without him? The question was a chasm at my feet. My eyes landed on the one corner of the room that remained untouched by my frantic makeover. In the alcove by the window, where the light was best, stood an old, neglected piece of furniture covered in a dust sheet. I walked over and pulled the sheet away. It was my mother's baby grand piano, a beautiful mahogany relic from another life, from before I was Daniel's wife. I had played fervently as a teenager, but in the whirlwind of college, then marriage, then the curation of a perfect life, I had let it fall silent. Daniel had never been particularly interested in my playing. He found it a pleasant but unnecessary hobby. So, the piano had become a piece of furniture, a sentimental landmark in a museum of our marriage. I ran my fingers over the dusty lid. A memory surfaced, unbidden. My mother, her eyes closed, playing a melancholic Chopin nocturne, her entire body swaying with the emotion of the music. She had told me, music is a language for when words fail. Right now, words had failed me spectacularly. Without thinking, I sat on the bench. It creaked in protest. I lifted the fallboard, revealing the yellowed ivory keys. I placed my fingers on them, the posture feeling both foreign and intimately familiar. I tried to remember a scale, a simple chord. My fingers were stiff, clumsy. The notes that came out were halting, discordant. A frustrated tear welled in my eye, yet another thing I had lost. Another part of myself I had surrendered. But the frustration ignited a new, stubborn ember within me. If I could rebuild a house, I could rebuild this. I could relearn this language. The next day, I drove to a music store in a part of town I rarely visited. The air inside was thick with the smell of wood polish and potential. I felt out of place amidst the serious musicians trying out guitars and saxophones. I found the sheet music section and, after minutes of overwhelmed browsing, picked out a beginner's book for adults. "Come back to music," the cover cheerfully promised. As I was turning to leave, a small, colorful poster tacked to a bulletin board caught my eye. Sterling Architects Redefining Urban Living. Below the text was a photograph of a stunning, modern apartment interior. It was nothing like my old beige prison or even my new navy blue fortress. It was all light, air, and clean lines. It was bold and intelligent. It was, I realized with a start, something I actually found beautiful for myself, not for anyone else. On a whim, I took a picture of the poster with my phone. My first piano lesson was a disaster. The book might as well have been in hieroglyphics. My fingers refused to cooperate, pressing 2 keys at once or missing them entirely. The metronome's relentless ticking felt like a mockery of my incompetence, but I persisted. Day after day, I sat at that piano, an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. The discordant jumbles slowly, painstakingly, began to coalesce into recognizable patterns. A C major scale. A simple 5-finger exercise. The process was maddeningly slow, a brutal exercise in humility. But with every note I mastered, however small, I felt a tiny piece of my own agency click back into place. This wasn't for a grade. This wasn't to impress Daniel or guests. This was for me. The piano was teaching me patience. It was teaching me that rebuilding, whether a house or a soul, happens one painstaking note, one single step at a time. Weeks bled into a month. I could play a rudimentary version of Ode to Joy. It was a child's accomplishment, but to me, it was a symphony. I was creating harmony out of chaos with my own two hands. It was during one of these practice sessions, while I was fumbling through a new piece, that my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely did. I closed the piano lid, a faint sense of unease prickling my skin. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man and a woman standing on my porch. The woman was holding a clipboard. The man had his back to me, but I could see he was tall, with broad shoulders and dark, slightly unruly hair. He was dressed in smart but casual clothes, dark jeans, a well-fitted blazer, not a corporate uniform. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled brightly. "Hi, we're from the Neighborhood Historical Society. We're documenting the mid-century modern homes in this area, and yours is one of the best-preserved examples. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about the original architecture?" I was about to politely decline, to retreat back into my sanctuary, when the man turned around. And I froze. He was compelling. Not in a classically handsome, polished way like Daniel. His face had more character. A strong jaw, intelligent eyes that held a hint of warmth, and a slight, curious smile playing on his lips as he glanced past me, into the house. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, and his voice was a calm, steady baritone. "It's just, we could see you've done some incredible work on the interior from the window. That navy is a brave choice. It's stunning." He wasn't just giving an empty compliment. There was a genuine appreciation in his eyes, the look of a professional who understood design. And then I noticed it, the logo on his blazer pocket, a stylized S and A. Sterling Architects. My mind made the connection before I could process it. The poster in the music store. This was him, the architect. Thank you," I managed, my voice tighter than I intended. I opened the door a little wider, my grip on the knob still tense. "I've been renovating." "We can see that," the woman said, peering inside with open curiosity. "It's a dramatic transformation from the original floor plan." The man, the architect, extended his hand. "I'm Alex Sterling. This is my colleague, Sarah." I took his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Natalie," I said. "It's a pleasure, Natalie," Alex said, and his eyes did something then that undid me completely. They didn't flicker over my shoulder to assess my belongings or my worth. They didn't hold a trace of pity or curiosity about the lone woman in the big house. They held mine, just for a second, and in them I saw a quiet, focused attention. He was really seeing me, not the ghost of who I was supposed to be, and he noticed the small, calloused crack on my index finger from the piano strings. "You play?" he asked, his gaze flicking towards the piano in the alcove. The question was so simple, so unexpected, it shattered the last of my defensive posture. It was the first time anyone had asked me that in nearly a decade. "I'm learning again," I said, and to my horror, my voice cracked. In that moment, on my doorstep, with the Historical Society questionnaire completely forgotten, the carefully constructed walls around my new life developed their first hairline fracture. It wasn't caused by force, but by a simple, observant question from a stranger with kind eyes. The symphony of my solitary rebuilding had just introduced a new, unexpected, and terrifyingly beautiful note. The encounter at the door left me unsettled for days. Alex Sterling's face, his voice, the way he'd noticed the callus on my finger, it all replayed in my mind on a loop. It was the first genuine, unscripted human interaction I'd had in months that wasn't tied to lawyers, contractors, or cashiers. It felt like a pinprick of light in a very dark room, both terrifying and irresistible. I threw myself back into my projects with a renewed, almost frantic energy. The piano saw more of me. The simple melodies began to find a rhythm, my fingers slowly remembering their old agility. But the silence between practice sessions was now filled with a new kind of restlessness. The house was finished. The piano was a solitary pursuit. I needed something more. Something that was entirely, undeniably mine in a way that even the renovated house wasn't. A skill set, a career, an identity that no one could ever take away. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. the kind that made the new navy walls feel cozy rather than imposing. I was curled on the sofa, my laptop open, idly scrolling through job listings for which I was hilariously unqualified. Marketing director, senior financial analyst, executive assistant. My resume was a blank page after education. A 9-year gap stared back at me, a monument to my erased professional self. Frustrated, I opened a new tab and typed the 2 words that had been whispering at the edge of my consciousness since the divorce papers were signed: coding bootcamp. The screen flooded with results. Intensive, 12-week programs. Full-stack web development. Python. JavaScript. A world of logic and creation that was the polar opposite of the emotional, domestic sphere I had inhabited. It was terrifying. It was a language I didn't speak, a universe I didn't understand. But as I read about building applications from scratch, about solving complex problems with lines of code, I felt a flicker of the same excitement I'd felt wielding the crowbar. This was another wall to tear down. This was another room to rebuild. Without allowing myself to overthink it, I clicked Apply on the first one that looked reputable. I filled out the forms with a pounding heart, my answers a mix of honesty and desperate hope. Under Reason for Application, I wrote, I have spent 9 years building a home for someone else. Now, I want to learn to build things for myself. A week later, I was sitting in a sterile, brightly lit classroom in a downtown Denver office building, surrounded by people half my age wearing hoodies and looking at their phones with an air of casual competence. I felt like an imposter, a housewife playing dress-up in a world of real adults. The instructor, a woman in her late 20s with sharp glasses and an even sharper demeanor, introduced the curriculum. The words variables, functions, and control flow swirled around me, a meaningless incantation. The first exercise was to make a simple program print "Hello, world" to the console. I stared at the blank screen, my mind a perfect mirror of its emptiness. The young man next to me, whose name was Leo, finished in 3 seconds. He glanced at my frozen screen. Stuck? He asked, not unkindly. I don't know where to start, I admitted, my face flushing with humiliation. He leaned over. Just type console log "Hello, world" right there. I typed it, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. I hit enter. And there it was in stark white text against the black background. "Hello, world." A jolt, pure and electric, shot through me. It was a tiny, insignificant thing, a child's first step. But it was a step I had taken myself. I had told the machine to do something, and it had listened. In that moment, it felt more powerful than any perfectly executed coq au vin I had ever made for Daniel. The weeks that followed were a brutal, exhilarating blur. My brain, which had for years been occupied with grocery lists and social calendars, was now being forced to think in terms of loops, conditionals, and object-oriented programming. It was a mental marathon. There were nights I cried at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks, certain I was too old, too stupid, too far behind to ever catch up. The divorce grief and the coding frustration would merge into one overwhelming tsunami of despair. During one of these late-night breakdowns, I found myself at the piano. I wasn't trying to play a piece. I just started hitting keys, hard, dissonant chords that screamed my frustration. But then, almost unconsciously, my fingers began to find a pattern. A simple, repeating sequence of notes. A loop. It was a musical for loop. The logic of code was seeping into the art of music. I realized both were just structures, ways of building something meaningful from a set of fundamental rules. The realization was a lifeline. I started approaching coding like I approached a new piece of music. I broke the problems down into measures, practiced the difficult passages over and over, and learned to appreciate the beauty of a perfectly structured function the same way I appreciated a perfectly resolved chord progression. The two disciplines, one old and one new, began to feed each other, and in doing so, they began to rebuild my shattered confidence. The bootcamp's final project was to build a functional web application from scratch. I decided to create a simple program that would generate random daily affirmations, a tool for myself and for others like me who were rebuilding. I called it the Blueprint. I worked on it for 70 hours that week, surviving on coffee and the sheer, addictive high of creation. The day of the project presentations, I stood in front of the class, my knees trembling. I clicked the button on my application. The screen displayed, Your foundation is strong, your design is your own. Today, you build. A smattering of applause filled the room. It wasn't for a beautiful home or a perfectly planned dinner. It was for something my mind had conceived and my hands had built in lines of code. In that moment, I wasn't Natalie, the betrayed wife. I was Natalie, the developer. After the presentations, as people were mingling, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around. It was Alex Sterling. He was standing there, a faint, impressed smile on his face. Natalie, I thought that was you. I'm here meeting a client whose office is downstairs. I saw you through the glass. That was incredible, he said, gesturing towards the screen where my application was still running. My heart hammered against my ribs. You saw that? I did. Your design is your own. That's a powerful statement. His eyes, those same perceptive eyes, held mine. I had no idea you were a software engineer. The old me would have demurred, would have said, "Oh, I'm not, I just finished a boot camp." But the new me, the one who had just built a blueprint for her new life, simply smiled. "I am now," I said, and for the first time I believed it. The title tasted new on my tongue, a flavor both foreign and familiar, like a forgotten childhood dish suddenly remembered. Software engineer. I repeated it in my head as I walked away from the boot camp, the Colorado air crisp against my skin. Alex Sterling's unexpected appearance and his simple, genuine praise had sealed the transformation. It was one thing to tell myself I was a developer. It was another to have someone else, someone like him, see it and affirm it without a hint of condescension. But the high of graduation was immediately followed by the cold plunge of reality. I had a certificate, a simple web app, and a 9-year gap on my resume. The job market was a fortress, and I was a lone soldier with a slingshot. My days, once filled with the purposeful chaos of learning, now stretched before me, empty and silent. The fear was a physical presence, a cold weight in my stomach. What if the boot camp was just a temporary diversion? What if I had traded one form of dependency for another, from a husband to a classroom? The interviews were a special kind of torture. Explain the gap in your employment history, they'd say, their eyes glazing over before I even finished my carefully rehearsed answer about personal transformation and intensive skills acquisition. I could see the doubt in their faces. I was a risk, a hobbyist, a housewife with a late-in-life whim. After a particularly brutal rejection, a terse email stating they were pursuing candidates with a more traditional background, I found myself driving aimlessly, the streets of Denver blurring through a film of frustrated tears. I wasn't just crying for the job, I was crying for the terrifying fragility of this new identity I had built. It felt like a house of cards in a strong wind. Without conscious thought, my car found its way to a part of the city I hadn't visited since the early days of my marriage. It was an area of warehouses and old industrial buildings, many of which were being converted into sleek offices and loft apartments. And then I saw it. A discreet, backlit sign beside a large, renovated warehouse door. Sterling Architects. My heart did a complicated, painful flip. I pulled over, killing the engine. I sat there for a long time, staring at the sign. What was I doing here? This wasn't a plan. This was desperation. This was the old Natalie, looking for a man to solve her problems. I was about to drive away when the large glass door swung open and Alex himself walked out, deep in conversation with a colleague. He was laughing, gesturing with a set of rolled-up blueprints. He looked so assured, so rooted in his purpose. I slunk down in my seat, my face burning with a ridiculous mix of shame and longing. But as I watched him, something shifted inside me. It wasn't about him. It was about what he represented. Competence, creation, a career built on a solid foundation. I looked past him, through the glass door, into the open-plan office. I saw models of buildings, large-format prints of designs pinned to walls, people huddled around screens. It was a workshop, a place where ideas were turned into reality. And then, a thought, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced my self-pity. I don't need a job from him. I need to understand how he built this. I started the car and drove home, a new, steely resolve crystallizing within me. The fear was still there, but it was now a background noise. I had rebuilt a house. I had learned to code. I could build a career. That night, I didn't apply for any jobs. Instead, I opened my laptop and I started building a new project. Not a simple affirmation app. Something complex. Something real. I decided to create a full-stack application for managing interior design projects, a digital tool for people like the old me who were overwhelmed by a renovation. It would have client management, budget tracking, mood boards, and a supplier database. It was insanely ambitious. It was exactly what I needed. For the next month, I treated my job search like a job itself. I would code for 8 hours a day, breaking only for food and a brief piano session to clear my head. The problems were immense. Database schemas, user authentication, image uploads. I got stuck constantly. I spent whole days debugging a single, elusive error. But with every problem I solved, the foundation of my new self grew stronger. This wasn't for a grade. This wasn't for an interviewer. This was for me. I was laying my own cornerstone, brick by digital brick. One afternoon, wrestling with a complex query, I remembered a problem I'd had while laying the new hardwood floors, calculating the waste factor for angled cuts. It was a spatial, logical problem not unlike the one in my code. The memory didn't bring pain, it brought a sense of continuity. The woman with the crowbar and the woman with the code were the same. Both were builders. I finished the first working prototype of my application, which I named Sanctuary, on a Tuesday. I felt a quiet, deep satisfaction that no external validation could ever match. I had done it. I had taken an idea and made it real. The very next day, I had an interview for a junior developer position at a small, innovative tech startup that built tools for the construction industry. The lead developer, a woman named Anya with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked over my resume and then at the live demo of Sanctuary I had running on my tablet. She didn't ask about the gap in my employment. Instead, she pointed at the screen. "Talk me through your decision to use this particular framework for the real-time budget updates," she said, and I did. I talked. I explained the architecture, the challenges, the solutions. I spoke the language I had worked so hard to learn. I was no longer a supplicant, I was a colleague discussing a technical problem. Anya listened, nodding occasionally. At the end, she leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "most juniors come in here with textbook knowledge. You come in here with a product. You've already built the foundation. That's what we need." She offered me the job on the spot. Walking out of that office, the Colorado sun seemed brighter, the air sweeter. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream with joy. I just stood on the sidewalk, a quiet, unshakable certainty settling in my soul. I had a profession. I had a purpose. I had built the foundation of my new life not on the ruins of my old marriage, but on the bedrock of my own capability. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this foundation would hold. The first day at my new job was a symphony of controlled chaos. The open plan office buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt since the boot camp, but this was different. This was real. The air smelled of coffee, whiteboard markers, and the faint, ozone tang of processing power. My desk, assigned to me, held a single, powerful monitor and a blank notebook, a clean slate. Anya, my new manager, gave me a brisk nod. "Welcome to the structure, Natalie. Your first task is in the project management system. Don't hesitate to ask questions." The structure was a complex web of code repositories, project tracking software, and agile development rituals. It was a language within a language, and for the first week, I felt like I was drowning in acronyms and protocols. My colleagues were brilliant, sharp, and moved with a velocity that was intimidating. They spoke in a shorthand I didn't understand, their conversations peppered with references to previous projects and inside jokes. I was an outsider again, but this time, the wall wasn't built by a betraying husband, but by my own lack of shared history. My first assigned task was to fix a minor bug in the reporting module, a glitch where certain data points wouldn't visualize correctly on a specific browser. It should have been simple, but the codebase was vast, a sprawling city I had no map for. I spent 2 days tracing the logic, following tangled threads of functions and dependencies, only to find myself back at the beginning. The bug was like a ghost, present in one environment, absent in another. Frustration mounted, a hot, familiar pressure behind my eyes. The old voice, the one that had whispered imposter during interviews, returned with a vengeance. "You don't belong here. You're a housewife playing with code." I saw the young, hoodie-clad developers from my boot camp in the faces of my new colleagues, and I felt a century older, a lifetime behind. One afternoon, after my third failed attempt to deploy a fix, I leaned back in my chair, utterly defeated. I closed my eyes, and my mind, seeking solace, drifted to the piano. I imagined my fingers finding the keys, playing the same five-finger exercise I had started with, a simple, reliable pattern, a structure. And then it hit me. I was trying to read the entire symphony at once when I needed to focus on a single, out-of-tune measure. I opened my eyes, a new approach crystallizing in my mind. I wasn't just fixing a bug, I was debugging a system. I needed to isolate the variable. I created a bare-bones test environment, stripping away all the non-essential code, recreating the conditions where the bug appeared with surgical precision. It was painstaking, meticulous work, the coding equivalent of carefully sanding down a warped floorboard instead of tearing out the whole floor. 3 hours later, I found it. A single, errant line of code in a CSS file that was causing a cascading style failure only in a specific rendering engine. It was a tiny, almost insignificant error, but finding it felt like discovering a fundamental law of physics. A slow, deep smile spread across my face. I hadn't just fixed a bug, I had outthought the system. I committed the fix with a note explaining the root cause. An hour later, Anya stopped by my desk. "Clean fix, Natalie," she said, her tone carrying a new layer of respect. "Most people would have patched the symptom. You found the disease, good instincts." That small victory was a crack in the wall. It didn't make me an instant insider, but it gave me a foothold. I started to contribute in meetings, my voice initially quiet but growing steadier. I learned the rhythms of the team, the unspoken rules. I was no longer just learning to code, I was learning to be a professional. Weeks turned into a month. The work was challenging, often exhausting, but it was a fulfilling tiredness, the kind that comes from using your mind to its full capacity. I was building a new structure for myself, not just in code, but in life. My days had a rhythm: work, a walk in the park, piano practice, sleep. It was a solitary rhythm, but it was mine. One Friday, the team decided to go for after-work drinks at a cozy pub near the office. I almost declined, the comfort of my piano and my navy blue walls calling to me. But the new Natalie, the one who built sanctuaries and debugged complex systems, insisted. Go. We were a group of 10, crammed around a wooden table. The conversation was easy, flowing from work gossip to movies to travel plans. I was content to listen, sipping my wine, feeling the warmth of belonging, however tentative. And then, amid the laughter, I felt a presence beside me. I turned. It was Alex Sterling. My heart stuttered. He was with a small group of people, presumably from his firm, who had taken the table next to ours. His eyes found mine immediately, and that same, focused attention I remembered from my doorstep returned, now warmed by a genuine smile of surprise. "Natalie," he said, his voice cutting through the pub's din, "this is a coincidence. Or a bug in the simulation," I heard myself say, the words out of my mouth before I could filter them. It was a developer's joke. He threw his head back and laughed, a rich, warm sound. "I like that, a bug in the simulation." He gestured to the empty chair next to me. "May I?" He sat, and for the next hour, the rest of the world faded. We didn't talk about my divorce or his work. We talked about the logic of cities, the challenge of making digital tools feel human, the strange similarity between architectural principles and software design patterns. He told me about a project designing a library, and I found myself explaining how the user interface for my Sanctuary app was built around the principle of reducing cognitive load. It wasn't flirtatious. It was a meeting of minds. He listened, truly listened, his eyes never leaving mine, his questions insightful and probing. He remembered that I played the piano. He asked if I was still learning, and when I told him I was now attempting a simplified version of a Chopin prelude, he didn't just nod. He asked what it felt like to translate emotion into structure through my fingers. No one had ever asked me that before. When he finally had to rejoin his group, he stood up. "It was really good to see you, Natalie. The structure looks good on you." After he left, I sat there, the noise of the pub rushing back in. I felt seen, not as a victim, not as a project, but as a peer, as a whole person. The foundation I had built was solid. The structure of my new life was rising, strong and true. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if there might be room in its blueprint for more than just me. The afterglow of the pub encounter lasted precisely 48 hours. It was a warm, humming secret I carried with me, a private melody playing underneath the daily grind of code and meetings. I replayed the conversation with Alex in my mind, the way his eyes had crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the surprising depth of his questions. For the first time since Daniel, the idea of a man didn't feel like a threat or a reminder of failure. It felt like a possibility, a potential feature to be integrated into the architecture of my new life, not the entire operating system. But reality, like a stubborn bug in a production environment, has a way of reasserting itself. It started on a Wednesday. A major client was reporting a critical issue in our platform, a data synchronization error that was causing financial reports to display incorrect figures. It was a 5-alarm fire. The entire team was mobilized, working late into the night, fueled by pizza and a mounting sense of urgency. As the most junior member, my role was mostly supportive, running tests, checking logs, fetching coffee. I watched the senior developers, Anya included, huddle around a massive monitor, their faces grim as they traced the problem through layers of complex code. I felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. Here I was, secretly dreaming about a charming architect, while my professional world was threatening to collapse because of a problem I couldn't even begin to understand. The ghost of the housewife whispered, "See, you don't belong here. This is real, you're just playing dress-up." The crisis stretched into a second day. The team was frayed, tempers short. I was given a narrower, more specific task, to write a script that would help validate the corrected data once the core bug was found. It was a small, contained piece of the puzzle, but it was mine. I buried myself in it, the familiar focus of problem-solving pushing the anxiety aside. This was my load-bearing wall in this crisis. If I could make this one piece solid, I would be contributing. Late on the second night, most of the team had staggered home to grab a few hours of sleep. Only Anya and one other senior dev, Mark, remained, along with me. The office was silent except for the frantic clicking of keyboards and the occasional frustrated sigh. I had finished my validation script and was running it through a final battery of tests when my personal phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The subject line made my blood run cold: cease and desist, sanctuary application. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was from a lawyer representing a large, well-known home design software company. They claimed my Sanctuary app infringed on their intellectual property, specifically the layout and functionality of their project management dashboard. They demanded I immediately take the app down and provide a full accounting of its development or face legal action. The world tilted. My app, the thing I had built with my own hands, the proof of my worth, my sanctuary, was being accused of being a theft. It felt like a personal violation, a direct attack on the very core of my new identity. The panic was instantaneous, a cold flood washing away all the confidence I had so carefully built. This was worse than Daniel's betrayal. This was someone saying the creation I was most proud of wasn't even truly mine. Tears of sheer, blind terror welled in my eyes. The pressure of the work crisis and this new, existential threat converged into an unbearable weight. I felt a desperate, childish urge to call someone, to call Daniel. The old programming died hard, but I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. No, that was not an option. My eyes fell on the validation script I had just completed. A small, green success notification glowed on the screen. I had built that. I had solved that problem. It was small, but it was sound. And then I thought of Alex, not as a savior, but as a builder. What would he do if a client challenged the structural integrity of one of his designs? He wouldn't crumble. He would gather the blueprints, the calculations, the proof of his own original work. He would stand on the foundation of his own expertise. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was not a housewife. I was a software engineer, and an engineer defends her work. I minimized the lawyer's email. It was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, I had a job to do. I stood up and walked over to Anya and Mark's cluster of desks. "My validation script is ready for the staging environment," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I can run it as soon as you push the fix." Anya looked up, her face etched with exhaustion. She gave me a curt, grateful nod. Good, stand by. An hour later, they found the core issue, a race condition in the data processing pipeline. They deployed the fix. I ran my script. It worked flawlessly, confirming the data integrity across thousands of records. It was over. The fire was out. As we were packing up to finally go home, Anya put a hand on my shoulder. You held it together, Natalie. That script saved us hours of manual checking. Thank you. Her words were a balm, but the other crisis still loomed. The next morning, instead of panicking, I acted. I didn't call Alex. I didn't despair. I spent the entire weekend in a deep dive of my own. I meticulously documented every line of code I had written for Sanctuary, creating a detailed timeline of its development. I gathered all my initial sketches, my bootcamp project notes, every commit from my personal repository, proving the app was my original creation, built from the ground up. I prepared a point-by-point rebuttal, comparing my UI to theirs and highlighting the fundamental differences in architecture and purpose. I was no longer just defending an app. I was defending my right to exist as a creator. This was my load-bearing wall, and I would not let it crumble. On Monday, I sent a calm, professional, and fiercely detailed response to the lawyer with all my evidence attached. Then, I went to work. I was building my career, and I would defend my creations. The woman who had once hidden from doorbells was now ready to face down a legal threat. The structure was holding. The silence from the legal firm stretched into a week, then two. The oppressive weight of the cease and desist letter gradually lessened, replaced by a low-grade, constant hum of anxiety. I had built my defense, I had sent my evidence, and now all I could do was wait. The urge to check my email every 5 minutes was a compulsive itch I had to consciously ignore. It was during this period of suspended animation that my phone buzzed with a different, entirely unexpected notification. A text message from Alex. Hope you survived the tech apocalypse. Saw your company blog post about the quick fix. Impressive. If you need a distraction from binary, I know a place with excellent coffee and 0 lines of code. Alex, I read the message 3 times. A part of me, the part that was still barricaded behind navy blue walls, wanted to retreat. It whispered that this was a complication I didn't need, a variable I couldn't control amidst the legal uncertainty. But a larger, braver part, the part that had debugged production issues and faced down lawyers, recognized the offer for what it was. A lifeline to something normal, something human. I typed a reply before I could overthink it. Coffee sounds like a welcome patch. When and where? We met at a small, sun-drenched cafe tucked away on a side street, far from the corporate buzz of downtown. He was already there, seated at a rustic wooden table, 2 steaming mugs in front of him. He stood up as I approached, a simple, old-fashioned gesture that felt incredibly grounding. I took a liberty, he said, gesturing to the mugs. I remembered you take it black from the pub. The fact that he'd remembered such a small detail sent a warm shock through my system. It was the opposite of Daniel's grandiose, guilt-ridden gifts. This was quiet, observant, and deeply personal. For the next hour, we talked, not about architecture or code, but about simple things. We talked about the best hiking trails near Boulder, our mutual dislike for overly sweet pastries, the strange comfort of rainy Sundays. It was easy, effortless. The conversation flowed like a well-written function, each line naturally leading to the next. He asked about my piano progress, and I found myself telling him about the Chopin prelude, about the frustration of mastering the left-hand arpeggios. It's like your code, isn't it? He mused, sipping his coffee. A structure that has to contain emotion. The rules of music theory are your syntax. The feeling you put into it is the magic. No one had ever understood the connection so perfectly. I felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. As we were leaving, he hesitated on the sidewalk. I have a slightly unorthodox proposal, he said, a faint hint of color rising on his cheeks. My firm has a piano in the common area. It's just for decoration, really, but it's tuned. I was wondering, would you like to play it sometime? It has a much nicer sound than me trying to describe the load-bearing properties of a glulam beam. I laughed, the sound foreign and joyful to my own ears. A piano duet with an architect. It was the most bizarre and charming invitation I had ever received. A few days later, I found myself walking into the sleek, airy offices of sterling architects after hours. The space was exactly as I had imagined from my glimpse through the door, a symphony of light, wood, and clean lines. And there, in a corner flooded with the warm glow of the evening sun, stood a beautiful, baby grand piano. My fingers itched with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Alex was waiting for me, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "I have to warn you," I said, setting my sheet music on the stand. "I'm still very much a beginner. This might be painful." "All the best creative processes are," he replied with a grin. "It's called iteration." I sat down and began to play the Chopin. The piano was indeed magnificent, its rich, resonant tones filling the vast space. I was nervous, and my fingers stumbled in a few places, but I played through it, pouring my recent anxiety, my hope, my tentative joy into the music. When the last note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then Alex began to clap, slowly, sincerely. "That was beautiful, Natalie." He wasn't just being polite. His eyes were shining with genuine appreciation. He then sat down beside me on the bench. Our shoulders were almost touching. The proximity sent a jolt through me. "I can't play anything like that," he said, "but I can do this." He placed his hands on the lower keys and played a simple, solid, rhythmic chord progression, a foundation. "Improvise over that," he challenged gently. It was a leap of faith. I took a deep breath and let my right hand find a melody above his chords. It was hesitant at first, a few exploratory notes. But then something magical happened. I started to listen, really listen, to the structure he was providing. My melody began to weave around his chords, answering them, playing with them. We weren't two separate people. We were a single, collaborative instrument. He provided the architecture, and I built the emotion upon it. It was a conversation without words, more intimate than any I had ever had. When we finally stopped, the last chord hanging in the air, the world felt still and new. We turned to look at each other on the bench, our faces inches apart. The air crackled with unspoken words. I could see the same awe I felt reflected in his eyes. "See," he whispered, his voice husky, "we build well together." In that moment, the last of my defenses crumbled, not in a catastrophic collapse, but in a gentle, willing demolition. The load-bearing wall around my heart could finally come down, because I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than code or blueprints, that the foundation I had built for myself was strong enough to support the weight of something new. Something real. The melody from the piano duet echoed in my bones for days. It was a constant, warm hum beneath the surface of my code, a secret harmony that made the world seem softer, the colors brighter. The legal threat, while still a dark cloud on the horizon, no longer felt like it could eclipse my entire sky. I had built something with Alex, something intangible and beautiful, and that act had shifted my center of gravity. I was no longer a fortress. I was becoming a home, with open windows and unlocked doors. It was a Saturday morning when the official response from the law firm finally arrived. I was in the middle of practicing a particularly tricky chord transition, my fingers hovering over the keys, when the email notification popped up on my phone. My heart slammed against my ribs. The warm hum vanished, replaced by the cold, familiar dread. I forced myself to finish the chord, the note ringing in the silent house, a talisman against the bad news I was sure was coming. I took a deep breath, set the metronome still, and picked up my phone. The email was not from the junior associate who had sent the cease and desist. It was from a senior partner. The tone was markedly different, formal but respectful. "Miss Evans, thank you for your comprehensive and well-documented response. We have reviewed the materials you provided, including your development timeline and code base analysis. Upon further review and consultation with our client, we have determined that the similarities between your sanctuary, application, and our client's software are superficial and do not rise to the level of intellectual property infringement. Our client has agreed to withdraw its claim. We appreciate your professional handling of this matter." I read it once, then again, and a third time. The words "withdraw its claim" seemed to pulse on the screen. It was over. They were backing down. I had won. A sound erupted from me, something between a sob and a laugh of pure, unadulterated triumph. I had faced down a giant, armed with nothing but the truth of my own work, and I had won. This victory felt even sweeter than the job offer, more profound than the house renovation. It was an unconditional validation of my mind, my skill, my right to create. My first instinct, my very first, was to call Alex. He answered on the second ring. "Natalie, everything okay?" I couldn't form words for a moment. They dropped it, I finally managed, my voice thick with emotion. "The law firm. They're withdrawing the claim." There was a beat of silence on the other end, and then I heard his warm, genuine laugh. "I never had a doubt," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm so proud of you. Where are you? I'm coming over. We are celebrating this properly." 20 minutes later, he was at my door, holding a bottle of champagne and a small, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. He pulled me into a hug, a real, proper hug that wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a hug of shared victory, of absolute solidarity. I melted into it, breathing in the scent of him, clean linen and pencil shavings, and felt a final, heavy chain of my old fear fall away. We drank champagne in my navy blue living room at 11 in the morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows. It felt decadent and perfect. "I have something for you," he said, his eyes sparkling. "A housewarming gift. For the new, fully legal owner of Sanctuary." He handed me the flat package. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautiful, hand-drawn architectural rendering of my house. But it wasn't the house as it was. He had reimagined it. He'd drawn a stunning glass-and-steel extension off the living room, a light-filled studio space with a vaulted ceiling, filled with plants and a grand piano. "It's your music room," he said softly, watching my face. "A space just for that. No ghosts, just you and your choppin'." Tears welled in my eyes. He hadn't just given me a drawing, he had given me a vision of my future, a future where my passions had a dedicated sacred space. He saw the parts of me I was still learning to value, and he designed a world to honor them. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," I whispered, my voice cracking. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb gently stroking the callus on my finger from the piano strings. "Natalie," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious, more vulnerable. "I know your foundation was built on pain. I know how strong you had to be to lay every stone by yourself. I would never ask you to compromise that strength, but maybe there's room for a new wing, something built on joy." He wasn't asking to move in. He wasn't asking for forever. He was asking for permission to be a part of the ongoing renovation of my heart. I looked at him, at this man who remembered how I took my coffee, who understood the language of my code and my music, who saw my strength not as a barrier, but as a beautiful, load-bearing wall. I thought of the duet, of the way our separate creations had woven into one harmonious whole. I placed my hand over his. "I think," I said, a slow, sure smile spreading across my face, "that a new wing sounds perfect." He leaned in then, and he kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion, but of profound connection. It tasted of champagne and hope and the sweet, solid certainty of a future we would design together. It was the final seal on the blueprint of my new life. The renovation was complete. The heart of the home was no longer just mine. It was now a place where love was welcome to reside. The new wing of my heart, as Alex had so beautifully called it, felt less like an addition and more like it had always been there. A sun-drenched space I simply hadn't known how to access. Our relationship settled into a comfortable, joyful rhythm. Weeknights were for shared dinners, sometimes at my place, where he'd help me chop vegetables while I told him about my day's coding challenges. Sometimes at his modern, minimalist apartment, where I'd play his piano while he sketched. Weekends were for exploration, hiking trails he knew, bookstores I loved, and lazy mornings that stretched into afternoons. It was on one such ordinary Saturday, in the fluorescent-lit aisle of a gourmet grocery store, that the past decided to conduct a stress test on my new foundation. We were debating the merits of two different types of olive oil, laughing about something inconsequential when I felt the air change. A shift in pressure, a familiar chill. I looked up, and there he was, Daniel. He stood at the end of the aisle, holding a basket containing a single, sad-looking frozen dinner. He looked older. The confident, corporate sheen was gone, replaced by a rumpled weariness. His eyes were fixed on me, then flicked to Alex, who was standing close to me, his hand resting casually on the small of my back. The look on Daniel's face was a complex algorithm of shock, regret, and a flicker of possessive anger. My entire body went rigid. The laughter died in my throat. The olive oil bottle in my hand felt suddenly heavy, a relic from a life where I would have been buying it to cook for him. "Natalie," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the cheerful music. He took a step forward. Alex's hand tightened slightly on my back, a silent, steadying pressure. He didn't move away, he didn't posture. He simply became a presence, a load-bearing wall beside me. "Daniel," I replied, my voice thankfully calm and level. It was just a name. It held no power over me anymore. I heard you got a job," he said, his eyes darting to Alex again, clearly trying to place him, to categorize him as a threat. "Congrats." "Thank you," I said, not offering anything more. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. He cleared his throat, gesturing vaguely with his basket. "You look different." "I am different." This time, I allowed a small, cool smile. It wasn't cruel, it was a simple statement of fact. His gaze intensified, and I saw the moment his businessman's brain finally processed the scene. The easy intimacy between Alex and me, my relaxed posture, the sheer normalcy of our Saturday. This wasn't a rebound. This was a life. A life he had no part in. "I made a mistake," he blurted out, the words rushed, as if he'd been holding them in for months. "A terrible, stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything, Natalie. It was a moment of weakness. What we had, it was real." For a split second, the old programming threatened to boot up. The memory of the pain, the devastation, the shattered glass. But then I looked at him, truly looked at him. Not as the villain of my story, but as a man standing in a grocery aisle, holding a frozen dinner, trying to rewrite history. And I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, not even pity. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where he used to be. "What we had was real for me, Daniel," I said, my voice soft but clear as crystal. "But it's over. It was over the moment you chose someone else. You don't get to decide what your mistake meant to me." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. The possessive anger in his eyes guttered out, leaving only the weariness. He had expected a scene. He had expected tears or rage, something he could manage, something that would still connect us. He hadn't expected this serene, unassailable finality. He opened his mouth to say something else, but then his eyes met Alex's. I didn't turn to see what silent communication passed between them, but I saw the last of Daniel's fight drain away. He gave a curt, defeated nod. "Right, okay," he muttered. He looked at me one last time, a strange, lost look in his eyes, and then he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, disappearing around the end of the aisle. The moment he was gone, the air rushed back into my lungs. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. I turned to Alex. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of a quiet, fierce pride. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I leaned into him, letting his solidity ground me. "I'm more than okay," I said, and I meant it. The encounter hadn't shaken my foundation, it had proven its strength. I had faced the ghost of my past, not with a crowbar or lines of code, but with the simple, unassailable truth of who I had become. The past had thrown its worst at me, and my new structure had held, without a single crack. "He was wrong, you know," Alex said softly, picking up the bottle of olive oil I had been holding and placing it in our cart. "It did mean something?" I looked at him, questioning. "His mistake," he clarified, his gaze warm and sure. "It meant you got to become this, and I, for one, am profoundly grateful for that." He took my hand, and we continued our shopping, the mundane act now filled with a profound sense of victory. The stress test was complete. My heart, with its old scars and its beautiful new wing, was officially certified, resilient, and ready for whatever future we chose to build. The final box was labeled, in Alex's precise architectural script, "Music Room Fragile." It contained my sheet music, my metronome, and the small, ceramic elephant figurine my mother had given me for good luck before my first childhood recital. I placed it carefully on the lid of the grand piano that now stood in the very space Alex had drawn for me months ago. The glass and steel extension was no longer a rendering. It was real. Sunlight flooded the room, catching dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, celebratory fireworks. The move was complete. We stood there, the three of us, in the middle of the empty living room of our new modern apartment in the city. The air smelled of fresh paint and pine boxes and new beginnings. Alex had his arm around my shoulders, and standing slightly in front of us, her small hand securely tucked in Alex's, was Chloe. She was 8 years old, with her father's intelligent eyes and a dusting of freckles across her nose. I had met her gradually, carefully. First for ice cream, then for a movie, then for a Saturday helping me test the structural integrity of a blanket fort we built in my old living room. She was shy, wary, a little heart that had known its own kind of loss when her parents divorced. She didn't call me Mom, and I never asked her to. She called me Natalie, and the way she said it, with a growing trust and a hint of wonder, was better than any title. "So," Alex said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "What do you think, Bug?" Chloe looked around, her eyes wide, taking in the high ceilings, the wall where her own art would soon hang, the doorway to her new room. She then turned those serious eyes to me. "Is the piano really for everyone?" "It is," I said, kneeling down to her level. "But it has one special rule. If you play a wrong note, you have to play it again, but louder and with feeling, until it becomes a new, right note." A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. It was a smile that could power cities. I like that rule. This was the family I had never dared to blueprint, not one born from tradition or obligation, but one built, consciously and lovingly, from the ground up. A man who saw the architecture of my soul, and a little girl who was teaching my heart new, more joyful scales. Later that night, after Chloe was finally asleep in her new room, surrounded by her stuffed animals and the faint, exciting smell of a new place, Alex and I sat on the floor of our new living room, leaning against a stack of boxes, sharing a bottle of wine. The city lights twinkled beyond our large windows, a galaxy of lives and stories. "It's quiet," I whispered, resting my head on his shoulder. "It's our quiet," he replied, kissing my hair. I thought about the long, twisting path that had led me here. From the shattering discovery on the iPad to the catharsis of the crowbar. From the first halting notes on the piano to the complex logic of code. From the terror of a legal letter to the triumph of a won battle. From the ghost of Daniel in a grocery aisle to the solid, loving reality of Alex and Chloe in this new home. Every pain, every struggle, every note of grief had been a necessary part of the composition. They weren't mistakes. They were the dissonant chords that made the final resolution so sweet. I had gone from being the curator of a life meant for someone else's eyes to the architect of my own existence. I had a career I built with my own mind, a love I built with an open heart, and a family I was helping to build with patience and love. The journey hadn't been about erasing the past, but about integrating it into a stronger, more beautiful whole. The scars were still there, but they were no longer wounds. They were evidence of resilience, the grain in the wood that gave it character and strength. Alex squeezed my hand. "Happy?" he asked, the question simple, its answer profound. I looked around at the boxes waiting to be unpacked, at the blueprint of our future lying bare and full of potential on the floor. I listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of the city, the soft, even breath of a sleeping child in the next room. "I'm complete," I said, and I was. The renovation was over. The house was not just built, it was lived in. It was a home, and I held the keys.